Be sure to follow me on Twitter. There you can keep up with all the updates from Comics Explained and talk to me directly. So the origins of the Guardians of the Universe were given to us in Secret Origins number 23 in 1988. Now, this origin actually comes out of the Crisis on Infinite Earths event, but because the Green Lantern continuity never received a reboot with the New 52, this information still remains intact as the origin of the Guardians themselves. Now, what we're told in this story is that the Guardians originated on a planet called Maltus as the first living beings to come into existence with the birth of the universe. But as time progressed on this planet, single-celled organisms eventually gave way to multi-celled organisms, which resulted in an organism that's really only referred to as microcolonies. Now, DC isn't very clear with the basis behind these organisms or these microcolonies, but what they seem to be telling us here is that these colonies, these cells, seem to exist as part of a symbiotic relationship with various life forms on the planet, and that they effectively help these animals evolve and maintain an edge over the animals that did not possess these cells. And so eventually, with the help of these microcells, with this symbiotic relationship, animals grew into humanoids, which in turn began to establish a kind of organized society. And as the eons passed, this society eventually began to move towards the advancement of science and technology. Now, ultimately, the society of Maltusians, which they're pretty much referred to, were met with a plague. And while most of the race within the confines of various cities were effectively killed off, those who lived in isolation, those who lived in various mountains and rural areas were not. And so eventually scientists discovered a sect of women on Maltus that had removed themselves from a male environment in the sense that they had basically cast men aside. And what they found was that these women, while they did have this plague within them, the plague was dormant. And so what they basically discovered here was that if men and women came into contact with one another, that the plague would become active. And so the only real thing they saw for these races to do was to effectively isolate themselves from one another. But the problem here was that the Maltrusians still had to find a way to propagate their race. And so because they couldn't use more traditional methods of procreation, what they ended up doing is they ended up looking towards the idea of biologically engineering their offspring rather than simply having intercourse, or at least what we would presume to be some kind of intercourse between men and women. Now, the result was that as the generations passed and the method of biological engineering began to basically become more and more streamlined, the offspring found themselves on the cusp of immortality. And as a result, there was no real need for offspring anymore, in the sense that if they were immortal, there was no reason to have kids. And so what we found was that somewhere along the line, the genetic line of the Maltrusians who would become the Guardians basically stopped. And this is the reason why the Guardians, as we see them in DC Comics, are basically immortal and they don't seem to age here. Now, in addition, what we find is that while other members of the race of Maltrusians were very satisfied with their history, that is to say, with the understood origin of the universe, with the progression of their race in terms of how it was chronicled, what we found was that there was a man named Krona, and Krona was actually not satisfied with any of this. Instead, Krona wanted to basically push the limits of societal standards in the sense that he wanted to go all the way back and witness the origin of the universe for himself. And so what we found was that as a result of Krona's actions, that Krona had basically done two things. The first was that his actions had resulted in the splinter of the universe, in the sense that we found the multiverse, as well as the creation of the antimatter universe and the formation of the Anti-Monitor going into the Crisis on Infinite Earths. But the other thing was that we saw Krona's actions creating the essence of evil where evil hadn't existed before. And so as a result, the sect of the Maltrusians had basically retreated away from the planet Maltus, and they had retreated to Oa. Now, this is where the Guardians of the Universe basically got their start. What they ended up doing here is realizing that evil now existed in the universe, and that in some capacity it would take form. They decided to create a kind of a universal police force. And so as we know, given the history of the Red Lanterns, one of the first police forces they created were the Manhunters. But again, tying into the history of the Red Lanterns, the Manhunters are basically a total disaster. They had pretty much lost their minds, their programming had gone awry, and as a result, the Guardians, as well as various other races within the universe at this time, really didn't seem to have a choice but to basically hunt down the Manhunters and try to bring them to an end. And so in response to the Guardians' effectively failed attempts to create some kind of universal police force in the form of robots, they instead, basically using the power of the central battery, they basically created rings. They created the Green Lantern rings. And the goal here was to allow the rings to effectively decide who was worthy, so that they wouldn't pick individuals who would just arbitrarily carry out tasks, that instead they would pick individuals best suited for the position, meaning that they would be able to be of sound mind, of sound heart, they would have a moral compass, they would be able to determine right from wrong, and if the need was necessary, step in and perhaps even challenge the very essence of what it was they were being required to do. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if this video is well received, if you guys really seem to like this video, then we may step into the realm of explaining the origins of the Red Lanterns and the Sinestro Corps and different things like that, but let me know down in the comments section if that's something you guys would like to see. With that being said, I will catch you guys later. Peace.